Well, thank you so much, Bruno. It's fine now, right? Okay. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening, everyone, and good day to those who might be attending from places and time zones other than the Central European one. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to present part of the research that I have worked on for the past few years. And I would like to express my gratitude to Bruno for inviting me for the webinar series that he has been organizing for the past 3 years or more. The idea of this talk came about in 2022, I think, in an Iranian studies conference in Leiden when I was attending Bruno's talk on Ilkhanid manuscripts. My own research was on Safavid book culture, and I'm little familiar with the Ilkhanid period and its book culture and libraries. But when I attended Bruno's talk, the connection of my Safavid library to the Ilkhanid period was very much highlighted for myself because of the strong presence of the Ilkhanid works in my Safavid library. And anyhow, when you study a library, you usually need to go beyond the time period when the library was functioning, because the books in the library were products of much earlier periods and they survived the lifespan of the library. So the history of a library usually goes beyond the limited and shorter time period of the library itself. So this is where the idea of this talk came about. My presentation today is centered around one single manuscript whose life journey, as I will discuss, starts in the Ilkhanid, passes through the Safavid era, and continues to our time. The copy is manuscript numbered 5233, currently held at the Central Library of Āstān-i Quds Library, which is the library attached to the shrine of ʿAlī ibn Mūsá, the 8th Imam in 12th Shiism in Mashhad, Iran. This library, the library of Āstān-i Quds Library, I will be referring to as the library of Āstān-i Quds or simply the Āstān Library. And for those who may not be familiar, Āstān-i Quds Library literally means the holy threshold of Riḍā. So it is an honorific title that has been used mainly 20th century onwards for the shrine and the complex attached to it. So the administrative apparatus and all adjacent buildings and the whole system of related to the shrine is named as Āstān-i Quds Library. The copy in question is a multiple text manuscript or a majmu composed of 2 mathematical works of Greek origin. The first part of the majmu, entitled Tahrir al-Ukar, is an Ilkhanid recension of an Arabic translation of a Greek work on spherical geometry. So here we deal with several layers of intellectual work of various authors and translators over centuries. The multi-layered, longue-durée intellectual efforts that produce this work are documented in the beginning of the text. So here is the beginning of the first text in the majmu, and the red lines, which I have transcribed to the right, gives us somehow the history of the authorship and the composition of the book. The original main text in Greek is the Spherix, composed by Theodosius, the Hellenistic mathematician and astronomer of the 2nd or 1st century before the Common Era. The Spherix was a supplement to Euclid's Elements and was a foundational treatise for geometers and astronomers from its origin until the 19th century. The Spherix was partly translated into Arabic in the 9th century under the title Kitab al-Ukar. It was translated by Gustav ibn Luqa al-Ba'albaki, a Christian scholar originally from Ba'albak, as his nisbah shows. Ibn Luqa flourished in Baghdad during the period usually referred to as the Islamic Golden Age. According to what we read in the beginning of this copy, the translation of the work at hand was commissioned by the Abbasid Caliph Ahmad ibn al-Mu'tasam Billah, better known as Musta'inu Billah. The translation was completed by an unnamed translator. The translated work was then revised by Thabit ibn Qurra, Ibn Luqa's contemporary. Thabit ibn Qurra belonged to the Sabians of Harran in northern Iraq. Like Ibn Luqa, he also worked and flourished in Abbasid Baghdad and contributed to the translation movement. So this is from Greek antiquity to the Abbasid period. Some 4 centuries later, in the medieval period, Muhyiddin al-Maghribi, an astronomer associated with the observatory in Maragha in northwestern Iran, composed a recension of the work, which is the work we have here in the copy. So this is the first part of the book. The second part of the Majmu is similarly a recension by the same Muhyiddin al-Maghribi of a Greek mathematical work. This is the beginning of the second part. Entitled Tahrir al-Qura al-Mutaharrikat, it is a recension of Autolycus on the moving spheres, another classical Greek work on spherical geometry, which was translated from Greek into Arabic and revised by Thabit ibn Qurra, the same scholar who contributed to the transmission of the copy's first part. The 2 Greek works contained in this majmu were part of the works usually referred to as Kutub al-Mutawassitat, the intermediate books, which were the works studied after Euclid's Elements and in preparation for Ptolemaic astronomy and Ptolemy's Almagest. Recensions of the intermediate books composed by medieval Muslim scholars, including this recension by Muhyiddin al-Maghribi and earlier than this one, recensions of the same works by At-Tusi, became the main channels via which the ancient Greek mathematical knowledge was transmitted throughout later centuries. So what we are dealing with in this copy are layers of knowledge transmission, from Greek antiquity through the early Islamic translation movement and the involvement of non-Muslim scholars to the works of a medieval Muslim astronomer and mathematician. While based on earlier works, Muhyiddin al-Maghribi, I have considered as the final author of the copy's text. To contextualize the composition of the work, we now take a look at the author's life. Al-Maghribi was an Andalusi astronomer, astrologer, and mathematician. Before coming to Maragha, he lived and worked in Syria in the service of the Ayyubid Sultan al-Nasir Yusuf. Al-Maghribi's presence in Syria lasted until 1260, when the Sultan was killed by the Mongols who arrived in Syria and sacked Aleppo. Al-Maghribi was then sent to Maragha to serve at the city's newly founded observatory. The observatory at Maragha was established with the order of Hulaku, the Mughal Ilkhan, and under the directorship of the famous scholar Khaja Nasiruddin al-Tusi. Lavishly funded, the observatory was a large complex that included an extensive library, various built-in and mobile astronomical instruments, and a large staff. A mosque and residential buildings were also constructed in the complex. Active for more than 50 years, the observatory became an advanced scientific and educational center, to which scholars from diverse backgrounds and far distant places contributed. So Muhyiddin al-Maghribi was an Andalusi and then coming from Syria, contributing to the observatory and its activities. There were other scholars, Mu'ayyid al-Ordi, for example, who came from Damascus, and Ibn Fuati, a Baghdadi who came and served as the librarian of the Maragha Observatory. And there was also even a Chinese scholar, Fao Munji, who also was active in the library and in connection and collaboration with other scholars present. I have been unable to ascertain whether Muhyiddin al-Maghribi's 2 works in this copy were composed when he was in Maragha or earlier when he was in Syria. But we know that al-Maghribi was one of the senior members of the observatory, involved in its activities from its establishment. He spent some 23 years until his death in 1283 in Maragha, except for a short stay in Baghdad. In Maragha, al-Maghribi taught students at the observatory, wrote several astronomical works, and conducted extensive systematic astronomical observations that provided the data for his astronomical tables, or Zij, which came to be known as Zij Jadid Ilkhani. This is named Zij Jadid because it came after the earlier Zij, which was prepared by Khaja Nasiruddin al-Tusi, and the earlier one was called Zij Ilkhani. So considering his long stay and extensive scientific work in Maragha, it is very likely that the two works were compositions of his years in Maragha. Perhaps those who are more familiar with the biography of al-Maghribi know better when the works were produced, and especially comparing the scientific content of the works, it can show us when the works were produced, but it was really beyond my knowledge. So far about the copy's content and its author. Now let's look at the copy as a physical object with its own time and place of production and its provenance history. The copy is incomplete from the end, and the colophon is missing, but information coming from its marginal notes provides some clues to estimate when and where it was produced. On the copy's initial folios, there is an ex libris written in Syriac and dated in Greek, testifying to the fact that the copy came from the library of Gregorius Barhebraeus, the well-known Syrian theologian and writer. So this is the ex libris written in Syriac, and this is not my translation, unfortunately. I know neither Syriac nor Greek. I came across this copy early on in my research, but I really ignored this note, and the copy had the ownership of Sheikh al-Bahā'i, whom I was working on, but I didn't know this note. I didn't even know the language. So I somehow neglected the copy until I started studying the provenance of the copies in my library. And I was not sure whether this is Syriac or Gershuni, as it is written. If you see, it is written next to the note, it's written Gershuni, and Gershuni was Syriac, in Arabic in Syriac letters. So I asked a few people around me, and I was finally directed to Dr. Salam Rassi, a scholar. I think he's now working at Edinburgh, and he was probably the best person I was directed to, because he kindly translated the note and he identified the author, and he was at the same time working on a monograph on Barhebraeus. And he also introduced to me another copy with the same ownership, which I will talk about later. So I owe this translation and identification of this owner to him. Barhebraeus was a contemporary to al-Maghribi, the copy's author. According to the dated ex libris, the codex was in his possession, in the possession of Barhebraeus in 1592 of the Greeks, that is 1280 to 81 of the Common Era. So the copy's production date falls prior to this date, but obviously not earlier than the author's lifetime. As a result, the copy is a product of the mid-13th century. So it's an Ilkhanid product, the copy itself. Now about the place of copying. The copy was in the possession of Barhebraeus in 1280 to 81. This is the time when Barhebraeus was in Maragha. Having spent his youth in Crusader and Ayyubid territories in Syria, Gregory of Aleppo, later to become Barhebraeus, became the Mafrian of the Syriac Orthodox Church in 1263 to 64. And he moved to the east to the region near Mosul, which was under the Mongol rule. He held the position of the Mafrian until his death in 1286. In this period, while his usual place of residence was near Mosul, he frequently traveled and spent extended periods of time in Baghdad, Tabriz, and Maragha. We specifically know that in 1281 to 2, which is the time of the ownership of this copy, he was in Maragha. During his stays in Maragha, he taught astronomy, frequented the city's library, and enjoyed meeting and discussion with Muslim scholars in the city. He writes about the library in Maragha, where he accessed many Syriac, Arabic, and Persian sources. Barhebraeus' presence in Maragha coincided with the time when Muhyiddin al-Maghribi, the author of the copy's two texts, was also there working at the observatory. The two scholars knew each other and met in person. Barhebraeus refers to his meeting with al-Maghribi and quotes from him. Al-Maghribi is also reported to have composed an epitome, mulakhas, of the al-Majaz for Barhebraeus at his behest. Considering all this contextual information, it seems reasonable to consider the production place of the manuscript in Maragha of the mid-13th century. So both the work and the copy are products of the Ilkhanid period, Maragha probably of the mid-13th century. Barhebraeus was one of the first owners of the copy, if not its very first one. But what happened to his books, including this copy, after he passed away? This is a question I don't have a clear answer for. We know that Barhebraeus died in Maragha in 1286, and he was buried there, and then later his remains were moved to the monastery of Marmatai near Mūsá, where he's resting now. I'm not aware of any studies on his library, and as I said, I have come across only one other copy with his ownership, which is currently held in Istanbul. The second copy, which is a multiple text manuscript, consisted of mathematical works, mainly by Nasiruddin al-Tusi, carries the exact same ex libris and the same ownership dates. The same ownership date. It is possible that Barhebraeus acquired both copies around the same time in Maragha. And when his body and his remains were moved to Mūsá, it is possible that his belongings have been also moved, or they were already in Mūsá, and from there they started, his books probably started to disperse, and one of them reached Istanbul, and the other one is our copy, which we look into to see where it ended up. For the 3 centuries after Barhebraeus, we lose the track of the copy's whereabouts. It's only in the late 16th century that we find the copy in Cairo through an ownership note that Bahāʻu'ddin al-ʿāmilī left when he acquired the copy. According to this note, the copy was transferred to Bahāʻu'ddin in Rabiul Awwal of 992, so March of 1584 in Cairo. Bahāʻu'ddin al-ʿāmilī was an originally Arab scholar from Jabal Āmil in the south of present-day Lebanon. In 1554, he migrated to Safavid Iran as a child along with his father, Hussein ibn Abdus Samad, himself an influential Shi'i scholar. So this migration comes in 2 steps, and I have dated it in 2 different dates because the migration was not in one trip. The father, Bahā'u'ddin's father, first migrated from Jabal Āmil to Iraq, and he spent some 4 or 5 years. And then later, he, along with his family, traveled and migrated from Iraq to Safavid, Iran. That's why it is 2-step migration. Bahā'u'ddin was educated in Iran in a combination of the Jabal Āmilī tradition of Shi'i Hadith and law, which he studied with his father, and the Iranian tradition of the rational sciences, medicine, and Sufism, which he studied with Iranian scholars. Bahā'u'ddin rose to prominence as a jurisprudent interpreter of the Quran, mathematician, mystic, and poet. He became an influential figure in the Safavid system, perhaps the highest-ranking clergy of his time, and served as an advisor to Shah Abbas, the Safavid monarch, and as the Shaykh al-Islam of the capital city, Isfahan, for more than 25 years until his death. Starting in 1583, Bahā'u'ddin had a roughly 2-year trip outside the Safavid territory and through the Ottoman lands. Setting off for Hajj, he left Isfahan, the Safavid capital, and traveled through Tabriz and then the Van Ahmed Aleppo route to join the Damascus pilgrimage caravans. He performed Hajj. This going through Damascus was the common way Iranians went to Hajj at this point because of the tensions that were between Safavids and Ottomans. It was not safe to travel directly or through closer routes to the Hijaz. So this was the common way that people went all the way to Damascus, and then they joined the Syrian caravans to go for Hajj. And Bahā'u'ddin also followed the same route. He performed Hajj in Dhul Hajjah of that year, and then joined the Egyptian caravans and traveled to Cairo. Bahā'u'ddin stayed in Cairo for a while, met Muhammad al-Bakri al-Sadiqi, the leader of the Bakri Sufi order, and paid a visit to the tomb of al-Shafi'i. As a normal activity for scholars on trips in Cairo, he also checked and acquired some books, including the copy at hand. Bahauddin wrote a dated and placed ownership note on the copy's first folio that we saw, this ownership note, signed it in his famous signature, and stamped the copy with one of his seals. So this signature below, this is probably one of the most famous signs that Bahauddin left of himself, and this is he signs his name in it, Al-Abd Bahauddin Muhammad al-ʿAmilī, and I have found this signature on more than half of the books from his library. And then the seal at the top, this is just one of the seals that he used. I have identified 12 different seals that he used, 2 of them endowment seals, and then the rest are just the normal personal seals having his name along with some kind of pious sentence. And many of his books are stamped with a combination of these seals, and they also have the signature and notes that he left on the books. The notes also in Bahauddin's hand. This is quoting from Aristotle, and then the title of the book that I already showed, this is also written in Bahauddin's hand. And this is another page where he writes one of the poems that he composed on the way to Hajj, and then he copied it later when he got this copy, and he signs the poem also in his name at the end, حرره الفقير بهاء الدين محمد العاملي. Bahauddin then, having acquired this copy, Bahauddin then returned to Iran through Jerusalem, Damascus, and the same Aleppo Amid Van route, and took the copy with him. Therefore, our copy was returned to where it was produced 300 years ago and reached Isfahan to sit on the shelves of the Sheikh's library. This copy was one of the many books on the mathematical subjects that Bahauddin had in his library, including the works of other scholars associated with the Maragha school, especially at-Tusi, but also al-Urdi and Qutbuddin al-Shirazi. So the books from the authors associated with the library have a high number in Bahauddin's library. This is where this strong Ilkhanid presence in his library come from. And in addition to mathematical works, there is also a good part of religious works with the authors of the same time period, especially al-Allāma al-Ḥillī. So the Hilla school of Shi'i Hadith and Fiqh is also very much present in his library. And that's a combination of these Shi'i sources along with this mathematical sources, which are the products of the Ilkhanid period, somehow shape this Ilkhanid presence in his library. But I'm not talking here about the religious part of the library. The existence of this copy in Bahauddin's library testifies to his familiarity with the classical texts of ancient Greek mathematics, although not in their original Arabic translation, but in their later recensions. And in fact, this was the common way ancient Greek knowledge was available in the Safavid period. Now, what happened to our copy after Bahauddin? It is commonly believed that Bahauddin endowed his books to the library of Āstān-i Quds in Mashhad upon his death. Nevertheless, as I have shown elsewhere, in contrast to the common belief, neither was Bahauddin's entire library endowed, nor were all his endowed books endowed to the Radawi shrine. Of the 107 copies with Bahauddin's ownership that I have identified, only half of them have his endowment marks, and the rest are devoid of his endowment notes or seals. Many of Bahauddin's books left his library as gifts or sold items. The copy under consideration is also devoid of Bahauddin's endowment marks and seems to have circulated in Isfahan for some time after Bahauddin's death. The next marginal note that informs us about the copy's whereabouts after Bahauddin appears on its last page and is dated 1145 of the Hijri calendar and 1733. According to this note, in 1733, the copy was part of the collection of 700 books that Nadir Quli Afshar, the later Nadir Shah, endowed to the Radawi shrine in Mashhad. The endowment was made in Isfahan following the Afghan invasion of the city and the position of the Safavid monarch when the city's treasures, including its books and libraries, were plundered and books were dispersed. Having rescued some of the books, Nadir, then a successful army commander, sent a collection of 700 books to Mashhad to be preserved in the shrine's library for the benefit of the madrasas associated with the shrine. This kind of information is specified in the endowment document sent along with the books. So this is the endowment document. This previous one, this kind of note is found on all the books that are endowments by Nadir. Out of 700 now, as far as I know, more than 400 books with similar notes specifying the endowment by Nadir are now preserved in the Āstān-i Quds. And then each individual copy has a similar note. And then this is a document that was sent along the books. So it's not on manuscripts, it's a separate document. And it gives a list of the books that were sent along with somehow the condition of the endowment. So this is the main endowment deed. From the time of Nadir's endowment, the copy has remained in Mashhad, in the library of Āstān-i Quds. This is what we can confirm drawing on the shrine's dated inspection notes that are present on the copy. So this is our copy, and these are the inspection notes that are by officials in the Āstān-i Quds Library. There was a practice and a process of inspection. It's called, in Farsi, it is called arz didan. So regularly, and especially on some occasions when the mutawalli of the superintendent of the shrine was changed, holdings of the library were checked and controlled and registered. And at the same time, a list of all the library's holdings was provided, and the manuscripts that were checked received one of these small notes, dated and with the seal of the superintendent of the shrine or the deputy. So, and these kind of things can be found on whatever manuscript from the library of Āstān-i Quds. And sometimes when you find a book now in another library, whether in Istanbul or somewhere else with these things, then we know that it is coming from the Āstān-i Quds. And the practice was done historically from 500 years ago until 20th century. I think until some 30 years ago, it was still carried out. And in more recent years, instead of just handwritten notes, there were stamps. These two last one are stamps, not handwritten notes. And these are very useful information for us as historians, just to track when a book was entered the library and until when and where it was. So these are very useful kind of information. Now, so the book has been in the library of Āstān-i Quds after Nadir, since after Nadir, and it is still kept there. And this is what is proved somehow with this inspection notes. Now I'm gonna wrap up my talk. Having started its journey in Maragha of the mid-13th century, our copy traveled all the way from Ilkhanid Iran to Egypt, then returned back to Iran of the Safavids, witnessed the Afghan invasion of Isfahan and the fall of the Safavids, and eventually retired and settled in Mashhad, in the library of Āstān-i Quds. The story of this codex does not conclude to any specific already unknown argument. The story is just an illustration of book as an object in which intellectual and material histories intertwine. As an intellectual product, the book discussed here is an illustration of the already well-known tradition of writing commentaries and recensions in Islamic intellectual history, a tradition that not only preserved ancient knowledge for posterity, but also revised, commented upon, and improved it. As a physical object, the copy is a repository or an archive of the marks left by the individuals and institutions through whose hands it passed over centuries. While such adventurous paths has been the case for many manuscripts survived from the past. In the case of this specific copy, we are lucky that its famous owners left enough footprints to enable us to trace its journey and tell its story. Thank you.